Most people don't realize it, but you're living inside a collapsing civilization. In 2021, China watched millions of young people embrace a movement called lying flat, a conscious rejection of hustle culture, corporate ladders, and endless consumption. They weren't staging protests, they weren't shouting in the streets, they were simply opting out, and within months the government banned all online discussions of it. Why? Because when citizens no longer want to play the game collapses. And this trend isn't contained to China. Across the West, the same retreat is unfolding. Quiet quitting spreading through workplaces, record numbers of young men becoming NEET, birth rates falling below recovery levels. People aren't being pushed out of society, they're walking out by choice. Oswald Spengler predicted this exact pattern more than a century ago, not as a warning, but as an unavoidable cycle. To him, civilizations don't just fall, they commit suicide. And the collapse always starts the same way, with comfort, with fatigue, with a population that gradually stops caring. The real question isn't if this is happening. The real question is, can you see it happening right now? Spengler rejected the modern belief that history is a straight upward climb of progress. He called that a comforting illusion. Instead, he saw something far more disturbing. Civilizations behave like living organisms. They're born, they flourish, they peak, and then, inevitably, they die. This wasn't pessimism, it was pattern recognition. Across thousands of years, Spengler identified two great phases of every civilization. First comes the culture phase. It's spring and summer. This is the era of raw creativity, spiritual hunger, philosophical breakthroughs. Everything pulses with meaning. Think of Athens in the 5th century BCE, Socrates debating in the Agora, the Parthenon rising on the Acropolis, Sophocles staging tragedies that still shape modern storytelling. People build cathedrals, write epics, and chase the deepest questions of human existence. There's a shared soul, a unified purpose, a collective energy. Then something shifts. The culture phase evolves into what Spengler called civilization, the autumn and winter. The inner fire dims. People stop asking why and start asking how. Creation turns into calculation. Innovation becomes management. Exploration becomes administration. The focus moves outward, expanding borders, maximizing economies, scaling institutions. Cities swell, bureaucracies harden. Life becomes efficient, organized, and hollow. This is where modern audiences get fooled. A civilization can reach its peak power while already decaying internally. Rome dominated the world during the Empire era, yet Roman culture had burned out centuries before. The Caesars ruled vast territory, but Rome had stopped producing original philosophy. Instead, they copied Greek thought. They stopped inventing new architectural ideas and turned toward engineering refinement. They stopped birthing new religious ideas and began organizing the old ones. The buildings grew larger, the armies grew stronger, but the soul shrank. Here's Spengler's most unsettling insight. Cultural decline begins the moment a society stops producing new meaning and starts recycling the past. During the culture phase, artists create because something inside them demands expression. But in the civilization phase, creators turn into imitators. Workshops become museums, artists become critics, and everything slowly collapses into self-reference. Nostalgic, ironic, hollow. Just look at Hollywood. Remakes, reboots, sequels. We're no longer creating new mythologies. We're excavating old intellectual property and repackaging it. Politics follows the same trajectory. Visionaries are replaced by managers. Leaders turn into administrators. The machinery gets more complex while the soul behind it evaporates. This is where psychology matters. Human beings adapt to comfort. Hedonic adaptation resets our baseline so quickly that what once felt like luxury becomes normal, then required, then invisible. A society that lives in long-term ease gradually loses its capacity for hardship, challenge, or transformation. The muscles of resilience atrophy from disuse. Convenience becomes an addiction, and that addiction becomes slow-motion civilizational suicide. Spengler understood something deeper than economics or politics. Civilizations aren't held together by buildings, they're held together by shared meaning. In The Decline of the West, he wrote, A culture is born in the moment when a great soul awakens out of the proto-spirituality, and it dies when that soul has actualized all its possibilities. When that inner fire burns out, everything that remains, the institutions, the laws, the skyscrapers, is just leftover momentum, and the symptoms are unmistakable. Citizens grow cynical toward the values their ancestors treated as sacred. Ideals previous generations died for turn into jokes. Sincerity becomes cringe. Irony becomes the default lens through which people view the world. This isn't just cultural drift, it's spiritual exhaustion. When a civilization stops believing its own story, it is already in terminal decline, no matter how strong it appears on the outside. Ask people today what their society actually stands for, beyond consumption and personal rights, and watch them struggle. Ask what the West believes in, and most can name nothing beyond tolerance and GDP. Here, Spengler draws directly from Nietzsche, predicting the rise of what he called the last men, citizens who want nothing beyond small pleasures and predictable routines. They aren't villains, they retired, tired of ambition turning into conflict, tired of vision turning into disappointment, tired of greatness turning into tragedy. So they choose comfort, they choose safety, they choose distraction. They stop demanding greatness from their leaders because they've stopped demanding it from themselves. Mediocrity stops being something to escape. It becomes a lifestyle, something to embrace. Just be yourself replaces become something greater. Risk-taking gets pathologized. Ambition gets diagnosed as toxic. In this era, the nail that sticks out doesn't get hammered down. It gets medicated. We've built therapeutic frameworks not to help people transcend their limitations, but to help them accept them. There's a psychological principle called value dissonance, the stress created when people's stated values no longer match their behavior. When individuals experience it, they feel anxiety. When entire civilizations experience it, collapse accelerates. Spengler saw this clearly. Optimism is cowardice, he wrote, condemning societies that confuse prosperity with progress, convenience with meaning, and comfort with destiny. Modern societies preach community while designing a world built on isolation. We have more digital friends than ever, yet fewer people we could call at 3 a.m. We scrutinize politicians endlessly, but trust institutions less every year. This widening gap between what we claim to value and how we actually live produces a civilization drenched in quiet bad faith. No one truly believes anymore, yet everyone continues performing belief. The performance goes on long after the audience has walked out of the theater. Now we hit the psychological trap that ensnares every late-stage civilization. Convenience addiction, it functions exactly like substance addiction. The brain adapts. What once felt satisfying quickly becomes the bare minimum, so the cycle escalates. More streaming, more delivery, more stimulation, more numbing. People become calibrated for short-term pleasure rather than long-term flourishing. Thinking shrinks from generations to election cycles, from centuries to quarterly earnings, from legacy to viral moments. And here's the sinister twist. This short-term mindset makes us feel increasingly powerless. This is where psychologist Martin Seligman's theory of learned helplessness becomes a threat. When people repeatedly feel their actions have no influence on a massive, unresponsive system, they eventually stop trying. Late-stage civilizations create exactly these conditions. The machinery grows so vast, so tangled in bureaucracy, so captured by special interests and fractured authorities, that individual action feels like shouting into an endless void. Think about the average person trying to influence climate policy, housing or educational reform. The psychological effort required just to maintain a sense of agency becomes exhausting, so people give up. They exchange autonomy for predictability. They accept dependence because independence feels overwhelming. But where does all that frustrated energy go? It collapses inward, not toward developing character but constructing an image. You can't solve homelessness in your city, but you can refine your Instagram aesthetic. Civic energy mutates into personal brand maintenance. Social media didn't invent this. It's the technological expression of a civilization deep in Spengler's decline phase. Citizens turn into curators of personas instead of creators of meaningful work. They gather followers instead of wisdom. They perform outrage instead of initiating change. High emotional intensity paired with low actual agency. This is the psychological fingerprint of decline. People feel deeply while accomplishing almost nothing. And this learned helplessness doesn't stop at personal life. It rewires the entire political order. An overstimulated, drained population can't process complicated policy. So what do they vote for? The emotional hit of spectacle. Watch how leadership mutates. Competence becomes secondary to charisma because charisma delivers quicker pleasure, easier stimulation, cleaner narratives. This isn't because people are stupid. It's because exhausted populations prefer emotional immediacy over complex solutions. Citizens crave leaders who make them feel something, not leaders who quietly solve difficult problems. Politics transforms into entertainment. Campaigns turn into content. Debates turn into viral clips. Governance becomes spectacle. And here's the deepest trap. The behaviors that feel like self-protection, choosing ease, avoiding friction, outsourcing difficulty, are the same behaviors guaranteeing our decline. It becomes a civilizational prisoner's dilemma, where every individual's rational pursuit of convenience leads to the collective's irrational collapse. The economy notices this instantly. A population addicted to ease is the perfect consumer base, so self-care becomes something to purchase. Boundaries become an excuse for disengagement. Sensitivity becomes a justification for avoiding difficult conversations. The system doesn't merely allow this, it profits from it. We're not collapsing despite abundance, we're collapsing through abundance, not starving, but drowning in overconsumption, not oppressed but suffocated by choices, not impoverished but bankrupted by convenience. And here Spengler made a prediction that now looks prophetic. Late-stage civilizations inevitably produce strongmen leaders, not through coups, but through democratic elections. Citizens, overwhelmed by complexity, begin voting for authoritarian simplicity. He called this shift Caesarism, a return to concentrated personal power after centuries of distributed governance. Look at Rome. After decades of political deadlock and institutional decay, the Romans effectively begged Julius Caesar to take control. Why? Cognitive overload. Today's citizens process more daily stimuli than a medieval villager encountered in a lifetime. Complexity fatigue sets in. Decision paralysis becomes chronic. The psychological cost of freedom in a collapsing system becomes unbearable. So people search for simple stories, strong leaders, clear villains, easy answers. They trade complexity for certainty, even if the certainty is a lie. A tired mind prefers commanding simplicity over complicated truth. This is how democracies die, not with revolutions, but with relief. Campaigns become content, soundbites replace substance, image consultants replace strategists. Everything bends toward attention, because attention is the final currency in an exhausted society. And whoever controls the money controls the attention. Can civilizations escape this fate? Spengler's answer was absolute no. Not one, not ever. Every civilization follows the same seasonal arc because each is bound by the same organic laws. Spring becomes summer, summer becomes autumn, autumn becomes winter. Culture burns into civilization, meaning decays into materialism. Creation collapses into administration. The flame always dies. As he wrote with stark clarity, we are born into this time and must bravely follow the path to the destined end. There is no other way. Rome couldn't stop its descent, nor could any empire before or after. Power, wealth, military dominance, none of it matters once the spiritual foundation fractures. The outer structure can survive for centuries after the inner spirit dies, but the direction is already set. From Spengler's perspective, we're asking questions that have no answers. You cannot stop winter. You can only prepare for it. And now comes the essential reminder. This does not mean the individual is uniquely to blame. We are drifting through a world designed to make deterioration appear like advancement. The systems, the screens, the structures we move through daily all reward ease, comfort, and the softest possible route. Choosing a harder path isn't merely a lifestyle decision. It becomes an act of defiance, a refusal to obey the spirit of the age. Spengler declared civilizations terminal, yet his grim conclusion hides a vital clue. If the sickness is inner depletion, then whatever antidote exists must be inner renewal. The person who fails to see that this trajectory is fixed, unalterable, and baked into the pattern of history, Spengler warned, simply slips downward. You cannot halt the winter that overtakes the whole forest, but you can nurture a protected enclave. You cannot rescue an era, but you can devote yourself to the only domain you ever truly controlled, the crafting of your own soul. This is the Stoic antidote to fatalism, ignoring what you cannot direct, the fate of the West, and anchoring yourself to what you can shape, your choices, your habits, your thinking. Decline, ironically, produces rare openings. Vision sharpens when illusions fall apart. Reinvention becomes available when old institutions crumble. Values are hardened and purified when comfort disappears. If the ship you stand on is doomed, its fate is sealed. That does not fix your fate. Focus on the controllable. Strengthen your abilities. Aid those who drown. Build something capable of floating. The crisis becomes intimate. If the culture around you rots, will you corrode along with it or rise beyond it? Decline forces evolution. Not everyone adapts, but everyone receives the chance. Civilizations collapse outwardly because individuals collapse inwardly first, through countless quiet decisions favoring comfort instead of challenge. Renewal, however, begins the same way, individually, one disciplined choice at a time, selecting purpose instead of distraction. When the world grows hollow around you, seeking substance becomes an act of rebellion. The question is never how to stop winter, but what you cultivate in frozen soil and who you become as the snow accumulates. Now listen carefully. This video isn't merely information, it's a reflection. And most viewers will watch this, feel that sting of uncomfortable recognition, nod thoughtfully, and then do absolutely nothing. They'll swipe to whatever comes next, confirming Spengler's warning as they do it. The algorithm doesn't reward depth. It urges you to consume fast and move on. Every moment you slow down, sit with a difficult idea, and allow it to challenge you, you are committing a quiet act of resistance. So if this message actually made you think, truly think, not just momentarily feel intelligent, then prove you're not already one of Spengler's fading men. Share it, not because you liked it with the same passive reflex we apply to everything, but because ideas survive only when people deliberately carry them forward. Civilizations do not die from absence of truth, they die from absence of people bold enough to voice it. Comment below with one real decision you're making today that cuts against the direction of decline. Not a dramatic gesture, an authentic choice. Because any revival begins with personal responsibility, and responsibility begins with speaking it out loud. Winter has arrived. The question is, who you choose to become inside it. Don't only watch, act. That is how ideas endure collapse. One determined individual at a time deciding they still matter.